My sister told me my brother would receive the family cabin and I would receive $18,000 instead. She said it as if it had already been written down somewhere permanent, and I understood right away that it wasn't a suggestion. Stay with my story until the end, and if you feel comfortable, leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I know how far this reached. She told me on a Tuesday afternoon, standing near my kitchen counter while I was rinsing a mug I had already cleaned once. The words came out evenly. No emphasis. She didn't look at me when she said the number. I remember thinking that $18,000 sounded specific, like it had been calculated carefully, not guessed. I nodded once. Because that was the right response when someone was giving information, not asking a question. I didn't ask where the number came from. I didn't ask when the decision had been made. I didn't ask who had been there when it happened. None of that occurred to me in that moment. I only noticed that she spoke the same way she did when she told me about a dentist appointment or a change in her flight time. Informational, settled. The cabin had always been spoken about as the cabin, not Dad's cabin, not the property. It existed in our family the way some holidays do. Assumed, recurring. It sat near a lake we went to every summer when the children were small and later when they weren't so small, and then even later when some of us went alone because others were busy. There were no locks on the bedroom doors, and the furniture had been rearranged so many times that no one remembered where anything originally went. When my sister said my brother would get it, I pictured him there without trying. I pictured him fixing the dock the way he always did, methodical, quiet. I pictured his wife changing the curtains again because she never liked the old ones. These weren't new images. They had been there before the sentence was spoken. What I noticed instead was the word she used. Would, not might, not could. She said it once. Then she said it again as if to make sure I heard it correctly. He would receive the cabin, she said. And you would receive $18,000. I asked if she wanted coffee. She said no. I poured myself another cup anyway and stood there holding it while the steam went up and disappeared. She mentioned paperwork. That Dad had wanted things to be simple, that it was easier this way. I nodded again. Over the years, I had learned that nodding allowed conversations to finish more quickly. Later that evening, after she left, I sat at the small desk in my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept household documents. I didn't know what I was looking for. I pulled out old insurance papers, warranty booklets, the folder with my birth certificate and marriage license. I flipped through them slowly, then put everything back the way it had been. Nothing in that drawer had anything to do with the cabin, and I knew that even as I opened it. The next morning, I checked my email more than usual. I wasn't expecting a message exactly, but I noticed each one that wasn't about what I had been told. Newsletters, a receipt, an appointment reminder, no message explaining, clarifying, confirming. That absence felt normal at the time. I didn't yet think of it as absence. Within the first week, the number appeared again. Quietly, my sister texted to ask whether I wanted the money as a lump sum or in 2 transfers. She wrote it as if both options were equally reasonable, equally available. I stared at the message longer than I needed to, then I typed, "Lump sum is fine." I didn't ask when it would happen. I didn't ask what else had already happened. A few days later, my brother mentioned the cabin in passing. He said he was thinking of replacing the railing on the porch before winter. He didn't say anything about ownership. He didn't say anything about Dad. He didn't say anything about me. He talked the way he always had, assuming the cabin would be there and that he would be the one to take care of it. I said it sounded like a good idea. I asked how his knee was doing. We talked about the weather. When we hung up, I realized I had been holding the phone too tightly, but I didn't know when that had started. The bank transfer came through 2 weeks later. It appeared in my account with a brief description and no note. I recognized the amount immediately. I printed the statement and put it in a folder with my other financial papers. I told myself it was practical to keep records. I didn't sit with the paper for long. I didn't need to. From the outside, nothing had changed yet. My days looked the same. I went to the grocery store on Thursdays. I folded laundry on Saturday mornings. I answered calls when they came in and let them go to voicemail when I didn't feel like talking. If someone had asked me about the cabin, I would have said it was still there. That would have been true, but small administrative moments kept repeating. A form arrived asking for confirmation of address changes related to the property. My name wasn't on it. I put it aside at first and then eventually recycled it. Another email came through about insurance coverage, addressed to my brother. I deleted it without opening the attachment. Each time, there was a brief pause before I moved on. The way you pause when you reach for something that isn't where you expected it to be, you adjust, and then you continue. I didn't think of those pauses as anything important. I told a friend about the money during a walk. I mentioned the amount because she asked. I said it the same way my sister had, without emphasis. My friend raised her eyebrows and said it sounded fair. I agreed because fairness was not something I was prepared to measure just then. We kept walking. At home, I found myself reorganizing small things, a shelf in the hall closet. A stack of old photographs moved from one drawer to another. These were tasks I had put off for a long time. Now they felt necessary, though I couldn't have said why. Each finished task gave me a sense of completion that didn't last. One afternoon, I took out a photo album from the cabin. The one with the faded cover. I flipped through it slowly, pictures of all of us, different ages, same door, same steps. I noticed how often I had been the one behind the camera. I closed the album and put it back where it belonged. The money stayed in my account, untouched. I didn't move it, I didn't spend it, I didn't mention it again. It sat there as a number, not connected to anything else in my life. I told myself I would decide later what to do with it. Later felt like a reasonable time to make sense of things. When my sister called again, she asked if everything had come through correctly. I said yes. She sounded relieved, as if that had been the final step. We talked about something else after that. When we hung up, I realized she hadn't asked how I felt about any of it. I didn't think to mention that omission to myself until much later. In those early weeks, I still thought of the cabin as ours. Collectively, I stopped using that word out loud, but it stayed in my head. I caught myself saying when we go up there, then correcting it silently. The correction happened quickly. Without resistance, I didn't stop to examine why. I noticed I wasn't asked about plans anymore. No one checked whether I would be using the place during the summer. The schedule was discussed around me, not with me. These were small things, easy to overlook, and I did overlook them, one by one. At night, I sometimes lay awake thinking about practical matters, taxes, maintenance, the cost of repairs. I thought about whether $18,000 would cover what the cabin would need over the next few years. The thought felt misplaced, but I couldn't have said why. Nothing had been taken from me in a way that could be pointed to. No one raised their voice. No one told me I wasn't welcome. The decision existed somewhere outside of me, already complete, and my life continued around it. At the time, I believed that was all there was to understand. Before any of it was said out loud, before numbers were mentioned or decisions appeared fully formed, life still looked familiar. I didn't think of it that way then. Familiar was just normal. The cabin existed in my mind as something I could access without planning too far ahead. Not ownership, just access. If I wanted to go up for a few days, I went. If I didn't, I assumed it would still be there when I felt like it. No one ever checked informally. There was no calendar we all shared. We handled it the way families often do, by assumption. I had a set of keys on the same ring I'd used for years. They stayed in the side pocket of my purse, the one I rarely cleaned out. Sometimes I would touch them without realizing it, just to confirm they were still there. Before all this, my brother would call to ask if I was planning a visit. Not because he needed permission, but because he liked to know. I didn't question that. My sister would mention repairs as if they were shared concerns. Roof, water heater, dock boards. I listened, I commented. I stored the information away the way you do when something belongs partly to you. There was a rhythm to it. Summer meant the lake. Fall meant closing things down properly. Winter meant occasional conversations about what would need attention come spring. Nothing official, nothing written, just repetition. Before the decision, no one asked me what I wanted long-term. No one asked me how I imagined things ending up. I didn't notice the absence of those questions because I wasn't asking them either. I assumed there would be time. I assumed conversations happened when they needed to. Looking back, there were small adjustments already happening. I didn't see them as adjustments then. My brother began speaking with more certainty about future projects. He talked about improvements instead of maintenance. He used phrases like "when I redo" instead of "if we decide." I heard it, but I didn't stop him. My sister stopped including me in group emails about property-related mail. I assumed it was convenience. Efficiency, she was always good at that. I still received updates just later, condensed. At the time, I thought I was being spared details. I appreciated that. When Dad's health declined, the cabin conversations paused. Everything paused. We focused on appointments, paperwork, driving schedules. I spent a lot of time waiting in rooms with outdated magazines. I thought, when this part is over, we'll sort the rest out. I didn't say that to anyone. It felt obvious enough that it didn't need saying. After Dad passed, there was a stretch of time where no one spoke about the cabin at all. Not because it wasn't important, but because other things were louder. Arrangements, forms, condolences. I moved through those weeks doing what was needed when it was needed. I didn't push for clarity. I didn't slow things down by asking questions. I assumed that when things settled, we would talk. That assumption stayed with me right up until the moment my sister stood in my kitchen and spoke in the past tense about something that hadn't been spoken about at all. Before that moment, life still felt open. Not unresolved, just unexamined. And I didn't know yet that what I thought was waiting had already happened. After that first conversation, nothing moved quickly. That was part of what made it easy to keep going without stopping. The change didn't arrive as a shift. It arrived as repetition. Small things done the same way over and over. My brother started mentioning the cabin more casually, not to update me, just to speak. He talked about it the way people talk about something they already manage. A leaking pipe, a neighbor's new fence, the way the water level looked lower than usual. I listened. I said the kinds of things I had always said. That makes sense. You'll want to fix that before winter. Let me know how it turns out. The words came easily. They didn't feel like pretending, not yet. My sister sent fewer messages. When she did, they were shorter. She told me when things were done, not when they were being decided. The tone stayed calm. Efficient. I told myself she was trying not to burden me. That explanation fit well enough that I didn't test it. Weeks passed, then months. Each time the cabin came up, it came up as something already in motion. I was never asked whether a plan worked for me. I was informed that a plan existed. There was an email about insurance that arrived late in the evening. I recognized the subject line immediately. I opened it, read the first paragraph, then noticed the names listed below. Mine wasn't there. I reread it slowly, not looking for error, just confirming what was already clear. I closed the email without responding. The next time my brother called, he talked about changing the locks. He said it casually, like a detail. I felt a brief pause in myself, not panic, not surprise, more like a delay. I said, "That's probably smart." He agreed. We moved on to another topic. After that, I stopped carrying the keys in my purse. Not intentionally. I just didn't put them back after cleaning it out one afternoon. They ended up in a drawer with old chargers and loose batteries. I noticed they were gone a few days later. I didn't go looking for them. When summer came, no one asked if I was planning a visit. I noticed that first, then I noticed how easily I adjusted. I filled the time with other things, longer walks, more afternoons at home. I told myself it was nice not to rush. Once, I caught myself about to text my sister to ask about a weekend. I wrote half the message, then erased it. Not because I decided not to go, but because I realized I didn't know how to ask anymore. The system had shifted. And systems don't usually announce themselves when they change. They just begin operating differently until you notice you're no longer part of the process. I still thought of the cabin as familiar. But familiarity doesn't always mean access. Sometimes it just means memory. I didn't say that to myself yet. I only noticed that the space I once stepped into freely now required permission, and that permission was never offered. The repetition continued. Each small moment confirmed the one before it, quietly, without explanation. And because nothing dramatic happened, there was nothing to interrupt the pattern, so it held, and I moved within it as if it were natural, as if it had always been this way. There was a point when I started noticing myself thinking ahead and then stopping. Not because I'd reached a conclusion, but because the thought no longer went anywhere. I would catch myself considering a future visit, then realize I wasn't sure who that plan belonged to anymore. That uncertainty didn't feel sharp. It felt dull, like realizing a road sign had been removed and you were already past the turn. I didn't talk about it with anyone. Not because I was protecting something, but because I didn't know what shape the conversation would take. There was no clear complaint to make. Nothing had been said that could be challenged. Nothing had been done that required defense. The decision existed, but it lived somewhere else. I began paying attention to my own reactions. How quickly I agreed, how easily I adjusted. I noticed that when the cabin came up, I spoke less, not deliberately. I just didn't add anything new. I responded to what was said, but I didn't extend the conversation. There was an ordinary afternoon when my sister mentioned they were thinking about updating the kitchen up there. She spoke in broad terms. No details. I listened. I said, that could be nice. And then I waited for something else to follow. Nothing did. The conversation moved on to groceries, to weather, to things that didn't require input. I felt a brief tightening in my chest, then it passed. I told myself this was how things naturally changed over time. Families adjusted, roles evolved. It was reasonable to step back. That explanation settled in because it didn't ask much of me. I didn't have to feel wronged. I didn't have to feel overlooked. I could just feel done. But there were moments when the quiet felt heavier. Late at night, when I replayed conversations without knowing why, not to argue with them, just to hear them again, I noticed how often I had been spoken to, not with. The difference was small, easy to miss. But once noticed, it repeated itself. I wondered briefly whether I should say something, not confrontational, just clarifying, but each time I considered it, I couldn't find the sentence. Every version sounded unnecessary or too late. The structure was already in place, and structures don't respond well to late adjustments. I told myself I was being mature about it, that this was what acceptance looked like. But acceptance usually comes after understanding, and I wasn't there yet. I was still operating on habit, still responding the way I always had, even though the conditions had changed. I noticed how often I used past tense in my thoughts, how I referred to things as they had been, not as they were. That shift happened quietly. I didn't mark it. I just kept moving because moving forward required less explanation than stopping. And so the conflict stayed internal, unspoken, unresolved, not loud enough to demand attention, but steady enough to follow me through my days. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces spread out over time, quiet enough that I almost missed it. I was sorting through old papers one afternoon, the kind of task you do without thinking it will lead anywhere. Receipts, manuals, old notes in Dad's handwriting. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Then I came across a list. It was folded once, creased carefully as if it had been opened and closed more than once. Items written down, short lines. Maintenance tasks, phone numbers, reminders, and near the bottom, a note about the cabin, nothing dramatic, just practical. Reading it, I noticed something I hadn't before. My name wasn't there, not crossed out, not removed, just absent. I sat with that longer than I expected to. I thought at the time that the decision had happened recently, that it had been made after conversations, after decline, after everything else. But holding that paper, I understood something quietly. This hadn't been sudden, it had been gradual, administrative. The kind of thing that happens when people start simplifying long before they say so. I thought back to earlier conversations, how often my sister and brother had spoken together, how often I had been updated instead of included. At the time, I'd called it efficiency. Now it felt like preparation, not intentional, not unkind, just directional. I remembered how my brother had talked about future repairs with certainty, not confidence, certainty. As if the path ahead had already been cleared. I hadn't questioned it because nothing had been taken yet. That was the part I hadn't understood. Nothing had been taken because nothing had been mine in the way I assumed. I sat there with the paper and felt something settle, not anger, more like alignment. The moments I had dismissed began to line up. The emails, the omissions, the way decisions arrived fully formed. They weren't separate events. They were confirmations. I realized then that my role hadn't been removed. It had been replaced, quietly, without announcement. The cabin hadn't been taken from me. It had been reassigned while I was still standing nearby, assuming proximity meant presence. I folded the paper back along the same crease and put it away. I didn't tell anyone about it. There was no reason to, nothing new had happened, but something had finished forming. And once I saw it that way, I couldn't return to how I'd been seeing it before. After that afternoon, I didn't announce anything, not even to myself. There was no moment where I decided to behave differently. I just did. The next time my brother mentioned the cabin, I listened the same way I always had, but I didn't imagine myself there anymore. The image didn't form. It wasn't intentional. It just didn't appear. When my sister talked about plans, I let them pass through the conversation without attaching myself to them. I responded politely, appropriately. I didn't offer suggestions. I didn't ask follow-up questions, not because I was withholding, but because there was nothing left to contribute. I noticed I stopped keeping mental notes. Before, I would remember details, repair timelines, seasonal issues, things that might matter later. Now the information arrived and then left. I didn't store it. One evening, I went through my purse and came across the old cabin keys. They had been sitting at the bottom pocket, mixed in with coins and receipts. I held them for a moment, not sentimentally, just to confirm what they were. Then I put them in the small box where I keep spare keys that no longer unlock anything I use. I didn't label the box. The next time the topic of summer came up, no one asked about my schedule. That wasn't new, but I noticed that I no longer waited for the question. I filled my time differently. I made plans that didn't leave room for adjustment. I said no more often without explanation, not defensively, just firmly. This wasn't a reaction. It felt more like correction. I aligned myself with what was already true. There was relief in that. Not the kind that feels like victory, the kind that comes when you stop bracing. I didn't tell anyone that I'd understood. There was nothing to clarify. The system didn't require my awareness to continue functioning. I had been adapting without realizing it. Now I was simply doing it with accuracy. I noticed how little effort it took to stay quiet once I stopped hoping to be noticed. The space where expectation had lived became neutral, not empty, just unused. And in that space, I made a decision without words, without witnesses, without needing permission. I stepped fully into the life that no longer included that assumption. And nothing around me needed to change for that to be true. The consequences didn't arrive as a single result. They came slowly, through the way my days began arranging themselves without asking me first. I noticed time opening up in places where I hadn't realized it was being spent. Evenings felt longer. Weekends felt less conditional. I stopped holding them loosely, waiting to see whether they would be claimed by someone else's plans. My phone stayed quiet more often, not empty, just settled. Calls came when there was something specific to share, not to coordinate. Messages contained information, not possibilities. I answered in the same tone. At family gatherings, my role shifted in ways that were small enough to ignore, but steady enough to register. I wasn't consulted about logistics anymore. Seating arrangements happened around me. Decisions about timing and location were shared after they were finalized. I arrived. I participated. I left when it was time. There was an ordinary moment one afternoon that clarified this without drama. My sister mentioned, almost casually, that they were thinking of replacing some of the furniture at the cabin in the spring. She said it the way someone mentions a plan already outlined. I nodded. The conversation moved on. No one expected more from me. I noticed how my absence from these decisions created a kind of smoothness. There were fewer explanations required, no need to account for different preferences or histories. The process simplified itself. The money remained untouched. Sometimes I would see it when reviewing my accounts and feel a brief recognition. The way you recognize an old address you no longer live at, familiar but not active. I began to understand that the consequence of my quiet decision wasn't loss in the immediate sense. It was distance, a gentle, consistent distancing that required no enforcement. When friends asked about family plans, I answered with what I knew, not with what I once might have influenced. The difference was subtle. It showed up in the way my sentences ended sooner. I also noticed changes in how I spoke about myself. I used fewer collective phrases. I referred to my own schedule as fixed rather than flexible. This wasn't a reaction. It felt like an adjustment. There were moments when I wondered whether anyone would notice if I spoke up again. The thought came and went without urgency. I didn't test it. The system had already shown me how it worked. The cabin appeared less often in my thoughts. And when it did, it came as a complete image, not something in progress. I no longer imagined future changes there. The future had already been assigned. The consequence that stayed with me most consistently was a kind of emotional economy. I spent less energy anticipating responses that never came. I stopped scanning conversations for cues. I accepted information as information. Nothing felt dramatic. There were no confrontations to replay, no words to regret. The cost of this shift was quiet, and so was the result. My relationships didn't end. They thinned into something more formal, more contained. There was care but less exchange. I didn't feel excluded in moments. I felt concluded. That understanding carried through my days, confirming itself in small, ordinary ways, each one easy to dismiss on its own. Together, they formed the shape of what my life had become. And once that shape settled, it didn't change again. After everything settled into its final shape, there was no single moment I could point to and say this is how it ended. The aftermath didn't feel like an ending. It felt like living inside a conclusion that had already been writ. My days became quieter in a way that didn't draw attention. I woke up, made coffee, read the news. I moved through the hours without checking my phone as often. When messages came in, I answered them. When they didn't, I didn't wonder why. Family conversations continued, but they stayed on the surface of things. Updates arrived fully formed. I received them, acknowledged them, let them pass. I stopped storing them away for later reflection. They didn't require it anymore. The cabin rarely came up. When it did, it felt distant, like a place I had once visited regularly but no longer needed directions to reach because I wasn't going there. I didn't imagine myself back inside it. I didn't picture changes. The image stayed fixed, finished. The $18,000 stayed where it was. I never made a deliberate decision about it. Over time, it blended into the rest of my savings. It stopped standing out as something separate. Its origin mattered less as months passed, though I never forgot it. There were ordinary moments that confirmed the finality without saying so. A holiday passed without anyone asking whether I wanted to spend time at the lake. A summer went by without me checking the calendar for openings. Winter came, and I didn't think about whether the pipes needed draining. I noticed that my siblings seemed comfortable, not relieved, not apologetic, just settled. The arrangements worked. The system held. That steadiness told me everything I needed to know. I didn't feel the need to revisit old conversations anymore. The memory of my sister standing in my kitchen softened at the edges. It stopped replaying itself. It had done its work. There were moments of quiet reflection, usually late at night, when I thought about how easily a role can disappear when it no longer serves a function. Not removed, not argued over, just absorbed elsewhere. I understood then that what I had lost wasn't the cabin or the money or even a voice in a specific decision. I had lost the assumption that my presence would be accounted for without asking. That assumption dissolved and nothing replaced it. This understanding didn't make me bitter, it made me precise. I knew where I stood. I knew where I didn't. In the aftermath, I became careful about what I carried forward. I chose where to invest my time without waiting for signals. I stopped orienting myself around spaces that no longer adjusted for me. No one commented on this shift. There was nothing to comment on. It didn't disrupt the flow of anyone else's life. Occasionally, I would come across the old list in Dad's handwriting, tucked away where I had put it. I didn't read it again. I just noticed it was still there, a record of something completed by omission. The story of the cabin became something I could tell without emotion if I needed to, but I rarely did. It didn't require retelling to stay real. In the end, the aftermath wasn't about what remained missing. It was about what no longer needed explaining. Everything stayed calm, and everything stayed decided.